Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings. And let me call this meeting to order. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? A little more? All right. I'm going to turn this up a tad. All right. How's the sound? Sound okay, Stephen? We're good. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm Scott Pinsky, the chair of the Marin Coalition this year. Welcome to our program on the wildfire JPA, and glad to see a nice turnout today. It's an important issue. We're going to hear from some of the real experts on it. Let me begin by welcoming some of our public officials who are frequently with us from the Mill Valley City Council. John McCauley. John, are you here? There he is. Hi, John. We have two representatives from the Ross Valley Sanitary District, Michael Borstein in the corner. Hello, Michael. And Pam Meigs. You're finally here when I get to introduce you. Mags. See, I've already blown it. All right, sorry. I've said it wrong all these years. Okay, my apologies. Let me tell you a little bit about upcoming programs that we have scheduled for next month and then thereafter. We have in December, on December 4, a presentation on the Marin Public Employee Post-Employment Cost Issue entitled A Slow Motion Disaster. And the aforesaid John McCauley will be one of our presenters, as will be Larry Chu from the Larkspur City Council. So you'll want to hear that. In January, to start our new year, we're having an update from the County Registrar of Voters. Our speaker will be Lydia Roberts, the Marin County Registrar of Voters. Who said Lydia? Kevin? All right. Linda. We have a typo. I hope our program flyer is corrected. All right. Sorry about that. That's two mistakes. Third, and I'm fired. February 5, a preview of the March 3 primary election with our famous duo, Dick Spotswood and Greg Brockbank. You definitely want to hear those guys. They are a hoot if you've never heard them before. March and April, we are still scheduling, and for May, the topic to be announced, but our speaker is confirmed, and that is Noah Griffin. So those of you who know him will be delighted to hear him speak, and he might even sing. I don't know. Are we getting any music with that one? Hopefully. All right. By the way, all this information is always kept up to date on our website. As we book future presentations, those will go up there as well. So these 5 or 4 should already be up there, and then we'll fill in as the programs get announced. And also, our website, if you haven't checked it out lately, contains links to our past program videos. So if there's any program that you didn't hear or see or couldn't attend and you'd like to see it online, just click on our link and you can hear the entire program. And you can send that to your friends as well. We'd like to get the word out. Okay. Most importantly, I got a new cell phone, right? And let me show you how to turn it off. You do that. How do you turn off your cell phones? Show me. Okay, great. You get the hint. So, we are here to talk about a JPA and a property tax proposal. Earlier this year, the county civil grand jury issued a report on wildfire preparedness, where it reviewed conditions in Marin that make us vulnerable to wildfires. It assessed current plans to address the issue, and it recommended a new approach to meet these challenges. In response, the Marin County Fire Chiefs Association, together with the city and town managers of various cities, agreed that additional wildfire prevention efforts are needed. The result was a determination that the best way to develop and to fund a suitable wildfire prevention program would be through the creation of a Joint Powers Authority, a JPA as they're known, to be funded by a voter-approved parcel assessment. I called it a tax a minute ago. I guess it's technically an assessment. In September, the Board of Supervisors approved the Wildfire Prevention Authority, JPA. The funding needed to give life to this new entity is proposed as a parcel tax, well, now they call it a tax, that will go to the voters in March. I'll let you decide, is a tax an assessment? Is an assessment a tax? I don't know. It's all money. And we'll hear about that today as well. So our three speakers. First, Pat Randolph. She served as the foreperson of the aforementioned civil grand jury, which produced the report Wildfire Preparedness, A New Approach. Pat was a high school teacher and a secondary and post-secondary education administrator and manager in her career. She served for 12 years at the UC San Francisco in positions in both the medical center and the medical school. She holds a BA from Vanderbilt University and a master's degree in education from Gannon University. Where's Gannon University? Pennsylvania, okay. Christi Neil is a Marin County Fire Battalion Chief. Ms. Neil started her career in 1984 as a wildland firefighter for the U.S. Forest Service. She was promoted to the National Park Service, Pacific West Regional Office, where she held several positions. In 2014, she joined the county, where she's responsible for coordination and implementation of fire hazard reduction programs. She serves as a board member of Fire Safe Marin and was president of that organization from 2015 to 2017. Ms. Neal has an Associate of Science degree in Forestry and Technical Management certification from Colorado State University. And our third speaker, Quinn Gardner, is a San Rafael Fire Department Emergency Manager Coordinator. She's responsible for coordinating the city's emergency management services and initiatives and hazard prevention activities. Recently, she helped develop the San Rafael Wildfire Action Plan. Before coming to San Rafael, she served as Emergency Management Coordinator at UC Berkeley. She holds a master's degree in Public Affairs from the University of Missouri. Where's the university? Oh, I'm sorry. And a Bachelor of Arts degree from Webster State. Okay, so where's Webster State?
It's Webster University in St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay, there you go. Without further ado, do we have an order? We're starting with you. There we go. Okay, we're going to hear from the civil grand jury foreperson who was responsible for the report that led to the JPA, Pat Randolph. Thank you.
You know you're getting old when you have to have special glasses for special things. So I now have computer glasses that will help me to see what's right in front of me here. You know the topic that we are talking about today. So as has been mentioned, I'm here as the foreperson of the grand jury who wrote the report, Wildfire Preparedness, A New Approach. I've been asked here to talk to you about the findings and the recommendations in that report. And some of you may be wondering, you know, what does the grand jury have to do with the JPA? And you'll see in the end that was our ultimate recommendation. It was that a JPA be formed in order to coordinate wildfire preparedness in the county. So first, a couple of things about the grand jury itself that hold up your hand if you served on a grand jury. I know that that's a fairly good number of people in the room. So this will be well known to those of you who have served on a grand jury, but important for other people to know. Everyone on a grand jury takes an oath, which is administered by the presiding judge at that time. And the heart of the oath is that you will not reveal ever information or what goes on inside an investigation, except through the report itself. So everything I'm going to tell you today is in the report, because based on my oath, I couldn't tell you any other juicy secrets about what went on. Also, to let you know a little bit about the process that the grand jury goes through in order to put out a report. Reports are not opinions. Reports are really based on very extensive investigation. And those investigations are designed to find facts, which those facts have to be triangulated, meaning you've got to get the facts from at least 3 different sources for them to be considered facts. And those facts lead to findings, which are really logical conclusions drawn from the facts that you have learned. And then in turn, findings lead to recommendations. And recommendations are well-researched possible solutions, not the only solution, but possible solutions to the issues that have been raised through the investigation. So, in April, the grand jury, this past April, the grand jury released a report, Wildfire Preparedness, a new approach. There's also a podcast that goes with it that we don't really have time to watch today, but I would recommend that you take a look at the podcast. The report itself can be easily found by simply Googling Marin County Civil Grand Jury reports, and then you will see all of the reports that have been issued by year in the order in which they were issued. The report itself is 37 pages long. I hope it's exciting reading. But 25 pages of the report itself and 12 pages are the appendices to the report. And it's very important to know this is not the first report that a grand jury has issued on this subject. I went back over the last 20 years of the archives of reports, and there have been at least 6 reports which dealt with either wildfire or other kinds of emergency preparedness. Most notably, there was a report done by the 2007-2008 grand jury entitled Marin on Fire, Not If, But When. So we received a lot of press when the report came out. The IJ likes to have exciting headlines, and they emphasize the tax. But if you read the subtitle, it says, Investigative Panel Urges Creation of a Special Authority. And that's what we're really here today to talk about, is that's what really should have been the headline rather than the one about the tax. So how did the grand jury investigate this subject and get the information that they had? Well, because of my oath, I can't tell you who we interviewed. I can't tell you who we didn't interview. But I can tell you what's actually in the report. And actually in the report is a page called Methodology that lists all of the different things that the grand jury did in order to investigate. And I want to point out a couple of important things in there. Not time enough to read all of these, but note the third one, survey current fire preparedness procedures. In the report on page 26, in the appendices, there are charts that give all the answers. All the fire agencies in Marin received the survey and answered, and that information is in there. Also want to point out the last thing on there, that the grand jury, we actually visited Fountain Grove and Coffee Park with some expert guides, and we went to Paradise. And Paradise was particularly moving because we were in Paradise just about 3 months after the fire had happened, when it was still totally a disaster site. And we met with some important leaders in Paradise, and that was the emotional moment of this investigation. So as the grand jury investigated, we realized that things broke down into about 4 main topics or areas of concern. They're pretty obvious: vegetation management, education of the public, alerts, and evacuations. So what did we learn about each of those areas? Well, there are 22 findings in all, and Christi and Quinn wouldn't have time to talk if I told you what all 22 findings were. So I'm simply going to summarize those. And again, you can read them all by going to the website and reading the report. But under vegetation management, a good summary is too much vegetation, not enough management. Education of the public, we're not doing a good enough job of educating the public, and we're not being consistent in what we tell people, that depending on who you listen to, you may get different information about wildfire preparedness. Alerts, the biggest takeaway is that the alert systems that we have are opt-in systems. You actually have to take an action in order to be a part of Alert Marin or Nixle, and that limits the number of people who are actually getting alerts. And as we've learned over the last week, a lot of those systems are dependent on having power and the cell towers having power, so not perfect. Evacuations, perhaps one of the toughest topics that we looked into, and I think there were actually 12 different findings on evacuations. I would just like to suggest that to think about evacuations, imagine that you're up on a windy road in Mill Valley or up on Bald Hill. I once took a wrong turn going to my friend Lucy's house, and it took me 20 minutes to recover and get back to where Lucy's house actually is. And imagine doing that with everything on the side of the road on fire. And then once you get to Sir Francis Drake or Miller Avenue, think of all the impediments that are in the roads. More of the evacuation recommendations. And what all this kind of led to was an overall understanding that, at least at that time, there was no countywide, comprehensive, coordinated policies had been made, and no funds were available to prepare for wildfire. I want to emphasize we have great firefighters in the county, and they do a great job of fighting fires. But up until now, they haven't been as good at coordinating in preparation. They do get together, and I don't want to imply that they have not done planning before this, but it was not in an organized structural fashion. So, recommendations. Again, I'm not going to read all of these to you, but I'm going to give you, in addition to the website, a way to have them all. I brought a big stack of the inserts that were in the IJ in early October, and that has summaries and recommendations for all the reports that the grand jury published this year, and those will be available on your way out so that you can have all of these. Again, with vegetation management, less vegetation, more management, and perhaps better ways to enforce recommendations about wildfire preparedness. Education of the public, more education, more consistent. Alerts. We know there are difficulties, but in this day and age, we should be able to come up with opt-out systems so that everybody gets alerts unless they choose not to, rather than the other way around. Also, we should probably expand the use of audible alerts, that when all else fails. I know from my house, when the flood warning goes off in San Anselmo, I hear it in San Rafael. So that would be a great way to have better information. Evacuations. I'm going to sum this up in 4 different ideas. We need to plan, we need to practice, the fire agency needs to trust the public, and we need to make better use of public transit. Remember that a lot of people who live in Marin don't even own cars, and even for those of us who do, if you can imagine having made it all the way down Sir Francis Drake, wouldn't it be nice to have a ferry waiting to help you evacuate? And finally, the real reason we are here today, the umbrella recommendation that there should be established a joint powers authority as an umbrella organization for wildfire planning and preparedness, covering those areas that we've talked about. The grand jury recommended a 1/4-cent sales tax. That was the recommendation because we thought that would be, we had been led to believe that that would be the easiest thing to do. As it turns out, the 1/4-cent sales tax probably would not have raised enough money, and the county has figured out a way to make it a property tax. So grand jury has no problem with that whatsoever. So what happens, oh, one final thing, that when you get through, there are things you wish you had put into the report. And this is from the last paragraph of the actual body of the report that says, a citizen oversight committee should be created to make sure that the funds collected are used solely for the mission of the JPA. And we believe that that's very, very important. The recommendations go to elected officials. They have the option of saying they're going to do it, they're going to study it more, or they're not going to do it because it's too costly. So how did agencies respond to this particular report? Well, interestingly enough, almost all the agencies had the same response, that they clearly had all gotten together and written the response, and the response is basically, hey, this needs a little more study, but we're going to do this. And they covered the areas that will be important, that basically mirror the 4 areas that the grand jury found that were of importance. And finally, they said that this will be a parcel tax rather than a property tax. And then a couple of miracles occurred. First miracle was a group of grand jurors, exhausted after our very busy year, decided that nonetheless they were going to get together and formed what is known as the Marin Citizens for Wildfire Preparedness, which is made up of former grand jurors, some Firewise leaders, and others, to advocate for the formation of the JPA. And the first time we met, which I looked it up, was on July the 13th, because we couldn't get together until the grand jury was finished. And at that meeting, we learned that the JPA was already in progress. And I will then turn it over to Christie to let Christie tell you about that second miracle, the fact that the JPA has been created with 17 of the county's 19 fire agencies, and brought a headline from today's newspaper that yesterday at the Board of Supervisors meeting, they had the first reading to put the tax on the March ballot. So things are rolling. And we're going to hold questions until we all get through. So now to Christie. And Christie will know how to...
Okay, so thanks. Christi Neil, Battalion Chief, Marin County Fire Department, and yeah. How's that? Okay. So I'm going to kick it off with a video, and then we'll get into more discussion. So thank you, Pat.
Wildfires are bigger, burn longer, cause more damage, and kill more people than ever before. During the fire siege of 2017, when our friends to the north experienced that disaster, Marin was just one ignition source away from that occurring. We have the same fuel conditions, same weather, and same topography that drove that fire that night.
Wildfire risk is now a constant threat in California, especially in communities like Marin, with lush vegetation and development near significant areas of natural open space. Marin's natural beauty and abundant undeveloped lands are considered source fuel for a potentially devastating and fatal wildfire, similar to the ones that have ravaged Sonoma, Napa, Lake counties, and Paradise over the past few years. Many Marin neighborhoods are adjacent to wildlands because of a strong desire to live close to nature. Recent fire seasons have been longer, hotter, and among the deadliest and most destructive on record. The 260,000 residents of Marin receive fire protection and emergency response services from 19 separate cities, towns, fire districts, and the county. But there is no single agency responsible for coordinating wildfire prevention.
The threat of large destructive wildfires in Marin is real, and one of the most important lessons is that a fast-moving wildfire doesn't care about jurisdictional boundaries, but a coordinated large-scale effort to improve prevention and safety can make a difference, can save lives and property.
In response to the need for coordinated action to reduce wildfire risk in Marin, local fire agencies and municipal governments have proposed creation of a new joint powers authority, the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. The new authority's mission would be to improve and oversee programs in early wildfire detection, improved alert and warning systems, resident evacuations, vegetation management and fire hazard reduction, defensible space property evaluations, educating the public about wildfire safety, and more.
This new fire prevention and mitigation program is designed to be in addition to, not in replacement of, the current fire prevention efforts currently in place in our Marin communities. The program is designed to bring all of Marin neighborhoods up to a defensible space standard to minimize loss from large damaging wildfires, while also allowing flexibility to address local needs. For example, some communities have local fire issues related to the need for improved fire patrols, road widening, increasing the vegetation removal along critical evacuation routes.
Some local community issues that can be addressed, for one, is improving your primary and secondary evacuation routes from your neighborhood. Many communities within Marin only have one way in and one way out. How we improve that is by removing hazardous vegetation that's located along the roadsides. A second issue to address would be improved defensible space inspection program. How that is involved is by allowing a cadre of inspectors to come into our community and to be able to consistently inspect every single property and give recommendations on how you can prepare your home to become more fire safe.
Currently, no dedicated source of funding exists for wildfire prevention and preparedness in Marin. Options for securing a dedicated funding source are being evaluated, including placing a local funding measure on the ballot in 2020 for voters to consider. It is estimated that approximately $20 million per year is needed to implement an effective coordinated wildfire prevention program.
We've been lucky to avoid a major wildfire in Marin County, but luck is not a strategy. We need a good plan to make ourselves safer. Research and just plain common sense point out the need to have a coordinated county-wide wildfire prevention effort. It's been a long time coming, but I'm very excited to see all this come together.
In the coming months, cities, towns, and local fire agencies will have the opportunity to join the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, and decisions will be made about securing dedicated funding for the authority's programs. To stay informed, please visit www.marinwildfire.org.
And that same website has all the presentation materials, the actual JPA, frequently asked questions, a variety of things. So if you would like additional information, you can go there and or watch the video again. So I think You know, certainly we know that it's taken 100 years for us to get to the situation that we're in terms of overgrowth of vegetation and high fire hazard in Marin. And 2017 and 2018 were the deadliest, most destructive fire seasons on record. I've been doing this for 35 years, and every year we're breaking another crazy record in terms of fire damage, size, injuring people, killing people. So definitely things are changing, and we know that climate change is part of that. Our fire seasons have extended 84 more days since the 1970s. We know that our fire seasons, you know, this might be the new normal. We know that fire knows no boundaries, and that we have an extensive backlog of vegetation in Marin, and there's really no single agency that coordinates our fire prevention and mitigation preparedness as one. We are very good at response. We have a great mutual aid system, but none of the departments are funded nor staffed to meet today's demands for kind of the pre-fire work, this fire prevention, community education, community risk reduction, all those kinds of things. So this right here is an example of some fire modeling that we did and associated with our community wildfire protection plan. That red shows us that we have fire hazards in Marin, and that we have vegetation that can support very high flame lengths that can threaten our homes, our communities, and people. These are the kinds of conditions that we've been experiencing this late fall. North winds, warm temperatures, dry air. That red zone indicates to us that we cannot directly attack a fire in those kinds of conditions. It's too hot, it's too dangerous. We have to back off. We need aircraft, we need dozers, we need more reinforcements. And so we know that we need to do something different, right, to change how fire burns on the landscape in Marin to protect our communities. Insurance. Many of you have probably, you know, maybe gotten that notice from the insurance company that they're asking more questions about your future of insuring your property. Basically 3 points. Insurance losses are increasing. They're resulting in more companies leaving California. There is a huge increase in non-renewals, and overall fire insurance rates are increasing. A number of people had to go to the California Fair Plan, which is the last option of choice this last year, including myself. And I just got a notice that they're increasing that rate as well. So it's a big problem, and we think that we can have an effect on some of these insurance cancellations or non-renewals by treating fire hazards, by helping residents understand how to harden their homes. For example, in the 2018-2017 fires, the Sonoma residents, 78% of them were underinsured, and it cost them over $500 a square foot to rebuild their homes, and we know that that's going to be equal to, or probably a lot higher in Marin if that were to happen to us. So some of the background, and Pat touched on the civil grand jury report, but you know, we've had a unit fire plan in this county since the 90s. In 2016, we put together an improved document using latest science, a way for us to identify, prioritize, and implement fire hazard reduction work across the county. That's the 2016 Community Wildfire Protection Plan. It's online, lots of information in there, gave us a ton of things that we could work on, but it didn't provide any funding. In fact, this kind of document was needed so that we could apply for state and federal grants. And then that was followed by the 2018 lessons learned from the North Bay fire siege, a subcommittee put together by the Board of Supervisors, and brought in law enforcement. It brought in OES, fire agencies, land management agencies to come together and figure out what we could learn from the North Bay fire siege. We brought some of those officials down and talked to them about things that they would have done different, that they would change, and so that we are trying to make some of those changes in Marin beforehand. And so there was a number of items identified in that report that showed that we needed a more county coordinated response, and that we have to work together to accomplish some of those big items. And then I would call it sort of like the icing on the cake was the civil grand jury report that just reinforced all those same things that we were had known, but helped us move forward. So that's the kind of the background of planning and analysis, and this isn't new. We've known this, and so we really need to get going on working on it. So the mission of the JPA is really to oversee and to fund, and 60% of the funds raised would be focused on what we call a core program of improvements to our wildfire detection and evacuation systems, to vegetation management, fire hazard reduction. The core funds would also go to grants, public education, neighborhood wildfire preparedness, and then 2 additional chunks of that money going to 1, defensible space and home hardening evaluations, those for seniors and access and functional need grants, and then 20% of the funding coming back to the local agency to work on specific issues that they have related to fire prevention. And I'll talk a little bit more about the details of some of this. So the funding would look like this: those program areas, the core, and then 20% and 20%. And so we'll talk a little bit about the core program, early evacuation and an alerting system. We know that there's improvements that need to be made, improving our systems, alerting radio, sirens, mapping, identifying temporary refuge areas on a countywide scale. There's a lot of technology out there that we could use, improving contraflow, traffic planning, mass vehicle movement planning, a variety of those things that we know law enforcement is responsible for the evacuation system, and so we know there's a lot of work that we can do here. Fire hazard reduction, that's a big portion of the core program, where we need to reduce the combustible plants and vegetation on our landscapes, around our communities, and in our own yards. And that is obviously to protect communities and critical infrastructure. There's a variety of tools in which we can do that, being contractors, it could be crews, it could be equipment, it could be grazing goats and sheep, it could be prescribed fire, it could be a variety of things, all conducted in an environmentally sound way. Public education is huge. Most of the fire agencies kind of push a lot of the publication to Fire Safe Marin. So some of the work that could be done is supporting more of that outreach and fire preparedness, and working closer with neighborhoods to establish Firewise programs. We have just under 60 in Marin County. We're actually leading the nation. But those communities need some assistance and support through grants and a variety of things to get their neighbors going. So an important part of the program is public education. And then some of the 20% portions, a coordinated defensible space and home hardening program. That's where the Joint Powers of Authority would bring in folks that could do home evaluations and inspections across the neighborhoods in Marin, give them advice on how to harden their homes, how to educate them on reducing fire hazards on their property and around their homes, defensible space, those kinds of things, and then some grants to support seniors and low-income folks and folks with access and functional needs. And then having a small group that could deal with the dedicated abatement program. That actually takes a lot of time. And then the last 20% coming back to the local jurisdiction. We know that many jurisdictions don't have funds to deal with that open space property in their city or their town. Or, for example, San Rafael, they need funds to help with increasing fire patrols in some of their critical areas where they're having fire starts. Vegetation removal on evacuation routes, parking boxes, things to help improve our access and egress in communities. So we know that the local jurisdictions, towns, fire boards have those specific needs, and so this would help boost that. And it's not to supplant funds, it's really to boost additional work from their existing programs. So it's really a dedicated fund of around $19 million annually, stable source of locally controlled funding dedicated to prevention, mitigation, and preparedness. Not supplanting, but supplementing, proposed through a countywide tax measure for the March 2020 ballot. Obviously, it requires 75% or 66% support countywide. There have been some surveys and polling done that would indicate that Marin voters have shown some strong support for something like this. It would be ongoing versus one-time funding and grant dependence. Right now, we're all competing for the same state and federal grants. We're all competing against each other, and there's just no stable source. And then certainly some of these funds, can help us with some long-term needs and deal with some of our issues related to vegetation. So there's been a number of the Fire Chiefs Association, town councils have been working for a number of months on these kinds of putting together this JPA. That information has been a number of over 50 informational sessions in getting feedback. Some of those big topic areas were governance, citizens oversight, the 10-year measure sunset, and then a fair amount of environmental group input. So there are a lot of folks engaged. Not everybody got everything that they wanted, but we had to figure out what we could all come together and agree upon. And so it's been I think a good experience, and everyone's offered as much input as they felt necessary. Same with we've met with the Citizens for Sensible Taxpayers, the cost group, so we've had a lot of support, and we do appreciate that. We're trying to figure this out. We want it to work, and we need everyone to be on board. So the JPA is right now, there are 17 members of the countywide coalition, 9 fire protection districts or special districts, 7 towns and cities, and the county of Marin, working together under single joint powers of authority. And it represents right now the membership over 98% of the Marin's land and 96% of the population. So the structure would look a little like this. A board of directors, which would actually be 17, and that would be elected from the 5 operational zones, and I'll show you a map of that next, as well as an operations and budget agency staff, which would be made up of typically fire chiefs, town managers, also including a technical oversight group, advisory committee, I should say, and that could be made up of a variety of people from the operational zones based on, and they would get into the weeds of the kinds of projects and the work that's needed to be done and provide some of that expertise. And then all of it having the Citizens Oversight Committee that would provide independent audits and a view to make sure the JPA is functioning as intended. So the operational zones, the county is broken up into 7 zones, with that light green being Novato, and then San Rafael underneath it, the purple being kind of central Marin, southern Marin, and then the west portion of the county for the smaller districts in the county of Marin. So now to the details. Structure of the parcel tax, up to 10 cents per building square footage on improved residential and commercial units. Any of the multi-residential areas that had 3 or more units, that would be $75 a unit. And then a scale for unimproved parcels, up to a quarter acre is $25, up to a half acre, $100, and then greater than a half acre would be $150. There would be the same senior low-income exemptions and an up to the CPI cap of 3%. So if it's not that high, it doesn't have to go that high, is my understanding of how that would work. I'm a fire person, so all this stuff has been so interesting to watch and to be part of. And then obviously lots of fiscal accountability with the Citizens Oversight Committee, annual reporting of financials, audits, prioritized work plans, and the ability to adjust some of that spending over time. And this is what the parcel tax measure ballot language would look like. It's got the up to 10 cents. It would be a sunset, and generally providing $19.3 million annually. This is where the 10-year sunset will be put into the tax ordinance. And we're basically, our next step would be the public hearing November 19th in front of the Board of Supervisors with a resolution calling for the election. And the JPA would not become operational until the measure passes. And again, everything can be found at this location. If there's anything additional that you have questions for related to this, you can call me, email me, and we'll get the information. And I'll turn it over to Quinn.
We're good? Yeah? Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name's Quinn Gardner. I'm the emergency manager in San Rafael. So I think about really bad stuff all the time and try to figure out how we're going to deal with it. And the we, I think of that as really important because it's not about how just me or your firefighters or your first responders or your government's going to handle it. It's about we as a community and how we can move forward in addressing these needs. Certainly last week, I think, was a testament to that. And I think I want to say thank you to everybody here and all the residents across the community. It was certainly a trying week. Nobody likes being without power for an extended period of time. But from an incident standpoint and from an impact standpoint, the way that that went as well as it could have gone was largely thanks to you guys. So the preparedness that you've done at home, the relationships you have, checking on neighbors, being signed up for alerts, all that good stuff. So thank you. In San Rafael, we've been trying to kind of lead a lot of this vegetation and wildfire mitigation really since kind of 2007 and a little before then. We were one of the first jurisdictions in the county to start changing our ordinances to get a little bit stricter and say there are really fire-prone things that we don't want in the city, especially in our wildland-urban interface, or the WUI. Since then, we've come a long way, but we've kind of always been strapped by the challenge of funding. Measure A, which of course goes to parks in a lot of ways, was one of the sources that we were able to do some of that work in our open space. But still, every year we're tapping out our vegetation budget, which is why supporting and participating in this JPA has been so important to San Rafael. At the very end of last year, we had direction from our city council to create a plan that was unhindered by financial constraints. It's kind of like everybody's dream, right? Like, give me your wish list of everything you could do if you could without financial constraints. And so we spent a lot of time and put together what was the 37-point and then became a 38-point wildfire protection plan. And in March of this year, Council formally adopted that as our framework moving forward. So that plan didn't actually change any ordinances, but it said, this is what your fire experts, your public works folks, our law enforcement, this is what we're supporting as your staff. And Council said, yes, let's figure out how to do this. Some of those items we've been able to make a lot of great progress on. A lot of them are still funding issues, right? We were told don't worry about funding, but when the reality of implementation starts, you start worrying about it. And so some type of tax measure was kind of always something San Rafael specifically was going to be looking at, and we're really excited to see the whole county, or the majority of the county, coming together around this initiative. Through this 38-point plan, and since we adopted it officially in March, we've created a 15-member advisory committee. Kevin is a part of it. And through that, we've gained a lot of insight and perspective. And I think fundamentally the intent of all the framework was really consistent. But what I specifically was able to take away was how much the language we were using and the way we were communicating with the public mattered. And so our committee has been really essential in helping us figure out not just what like the dream is, but what is actually implementable. What do residents want to see and hear? One of the biggest things I think the committees help us shift from is we originally were looking at doing a lot more vegetation management plans, which can be fairly cost prohibitive, require irrigation systems, things like that. And one of the greatest recommendations we had is why not just require fee-based inspections for anybody that wants exemptions. So rather than potentially spending thousands of dollars to do a vegetation management plan, somewhere in the $50 to $100 range on a yearly basis, you can have somebody come out and say, yeah, your property is still okay. These exceptions to the rules are okay because of X, Y, and Z. And why that becomes so important is there really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to vegetation management. Fire moves and grows and impacts things in a lot of different ways because of a lot of different things. Your vegetation is one of them, what your home is made out of, what your windows are made out of, what your neighbors' homes are made out of, the slope that you sit on, the winds that impact your house. There are all sorts of factors, and so by being able to increase our defensible space and inspection program, we're really going to be able across the county to look at those one-on-one cases and say this is what will make you and your neighbors as safe as possible. And it doesn't involve concrete moats, and it doesn't involve pulling out all your favorite plants. That there are ways that we can do this together. And so we've been really grateful for the committee's feedback. I hope it'll serve as a model for kind of what the Citizens Advisory Committee could do with the Wildfire Prevention Authority. I think an important note with that, I might be speaking out of turn here, but if this ballot measure doesn't pass in March of 2020, the authority doesn't exist. So the ballot measure is critical not just to funding the work we want to do, but assuring we have a coordinated way to do it. So it becomes a really essential part of the process that we hope to see kind of moving forward. So where we are with our plan right now, we have made some changes and some updates. We have had to cancel the last 2 committee meetings because of power shutdowns and other good things. But I think we have our next meeting next week. And so hopefully with that, we'll have the final blessing of kind of our updated plan from the committee. We'll go back to council. We're really excited to say that the way the plan is structured, that Chief Neal explained, will support all the things we want to do in that action plan. And so it's specifically in San Rafael, if you like what you see in the action plan and you want to see it implemented, this ballot measure will support that. And having that local funds come back will allow us to do things like increase patrols, the parking boxes, and some of the things on top of increasing our inspections and actually getting the work done. That's a big piece of this, is we need to remove vegetation. We live in Marin because for most of us, we love being in the natural environment, but the natural environment continues to grow and comes back. So this isn't a thing where we get to do it once, invest the money, and say, okay, we're good, we're done. And we have gone so many years for various reasons, and certainly the drought and the health of the forest have really increased our fire risks. And so we have a lot of catching up to do before we can get to a good place of maintenance where we can all feel safe and continue to focus more on some of what we call the light fuels. One of the other important things I think within the that we've gone through as a committee, but that's also in the plan that I want to touch on, or the authority, excuse me, is the public education piece. More and more, the more I'm talking to people, the more I'm realizing because of the way we're interacting with fire and we are living with it, residents kind of need to understand what firefighters have been being taught for decades. It's not enough for us to say this is your home's okay or not okay, but if we can explain fire behavior to you, you can be better informed. And so we're really trying to increase that education where it's not just as simple as evacuation means get to 101. That's not the case, right? We saw that last week in Sonoma when we had everybody evacuating down 101, right? And you've all seen the really scary, intense videos, but the important thing to think about with those videos is people are surviving in those scary conditions. So we have a lot of places in Marin that we, whether it's called community safety areas, area of refuge, that we want to get people thinking about. That it's not about getting to 101 to be safe, it's about getting somewhere void of fuel. We are literally in a perfect example of somewhere we could be if there was a fire. Right? We have a massive golf course with short green grass and well-trimmed trees and a big parking lot and a marsh. As somebody that lives very close to here, I can tell you the direction I'm going to turn out of my neighborhood is not towards 101, right? This is where I can be, and I can be safe until the fire can burn through. And so we really want to increase that education, get people to understand a little bit more about fire behavior, and I think that also really helps people understand what vegetation works around your home, what vegetation doesn't work so well around your home. But the wildfire prevention piece is only really one part of kind of my world, right? I think about all the really bad stuff. So I need to be thinking about earthquakes and flooding and these power outages and all sorts of other things. And so I always take the opportunity, anytime I talk to a large group, you're gonna get my 3 spiels. So bear with me, but I want to encourage everybody to do this because it holds true for wildfire as well as everything else. Make sure you are signed up for the emergency alerts. If your phone was not blowing up with text messages last week, you are not signed up for emergency alerts. If you didn't feel like you were well informed last week, you're not signed up for emergency alerts. So you can do that as simple as text your zip code, your 5-digit zip code, to 888-777. It is that easy. That at least gets you signed up for NIXLs. We do have some challenges with the opt-in systems, and we do need people to opt in. So that's a big piece. Alert Marin is the other tool that we use that we want to get people to sign up for. I can do that either with your smartphone before you leave, or you can go to alertmarin.org and get yourself signed up. So please make sure you're signed up for alerts so you can be informed, you can know when you have to go, or when you don't, right? That's also important. The second piece is having and practicing a family plan, thinking about where you're going to evacuate to, right? I literally just told you part of my family plan. This is part of it. This facility is part of our family plan if we have to evacuate in the case of a fire. So know your plan, know your evacuation routes, make sure you're practicing that. And then the third piece is the supplies, right? If you ran out of batteries last week, if you don't have an N95 on standby, all those kind of things. Have your supplies ready. Do it now, and that gives you time to do the things you want to be thinking about. I think about my go bag a lot like my junk drawer, right? Where else, junk drawer, everybody good with that term? Sometimes I get Midwesternized when I use the term junk drawer. But where else am I going to keep my batteries or my first aid kit, right, or my flashlight? I keep it in my go bag. When I need it, I'll take it out and I'll use it. But then I have all that stuff together if I really did need to move. So if you don't have a go bag, please look into that. We do classes on these across the county, specifically in San Rafael. I have 4 more scheduled for the rest of the year. I've got some schedules and flyers I'll leave with you if you're interested. But come learn more about what you can do for the personal preparedness, because the way we made it through last week as a community, we want to be able to do that regardless of whatever the risk is or the hazard we're facing. And what you guys are doing at home and in your communities and getting to know your neighbors all contributes to our ability to survive. So get signed up for alerts, have a plan, gather some stuff. And then the last piece I want to touch on, because I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions, is just everything that was in our plan, and so much reflects what the grand jury report said. Sometimes it feels, right, as outsiders of the government, that we're all disconjointed, and I think it's been the whole Wildfire Prevention Authority has been this amazing look at what we can do, and we're all coming together. And it's happened in a really relatively short period of time. There's been a ton of background work done for it, like the Community Wildfire Prevention Plan, like our 38-point plan. But you have 17 of your fire agencies coming together in this united front to say, we can move forward together, recognizing how we're taking care of our neighbors matters. And that matters at the most microscopic level with you literally knowing the people that live beside you, above you, and below you. And it matters with us as communities saying, it matters for San Rafael if Mill Valley and Fairfax and Marinwood have good defensible space. Because if they don't, it doesn't matter what we did, and vice versa. And so this is really an opportunity to all come together, and I think you guys do that on a regular basis as your network. And so this is just a focus kind of specifically with wildfire prevention. For more information, or if you want to come to any of my preparedness classes, sroes.org is a good resource. And that's San Rafael Office of Emergency Services. sroes.org. And then we talked about the wildfire. Chief Neal gave you the website there. Fire Safe Marin's a great resource, as well as Ready Marin is the county preparedness resource. So there's a lot of good resources out there. Just really encourage you to take those steps. I think I'm right on time for questions. Terrific.
Okay, thank you all. Terrific presentations. Now we have your opportunity to go ahead and ask whatever you'd like.
I hadn't intended to ask a question. Well, actually, what I want to do is make a comment, and that is for Fire Safe Marin. I am so impressed with the programs that they have put on. So much so that one of the ones I attended at the Embassy Suites, they easily had 200 people there, and I thought the more people who attend these kinds of programs, the safer we are. And I recommend that you do that. However, I didn't see any of the people of our 144 unit association at that one particular meeting. So this morning, I forwarded the notice from Fire Safe Marin on the next 2 programs that they anticipate. And I asked our association newsletter person to get that information into the newsletter. So we all have a responsibility. And again, I commend Fire Safe Marin.
things, and if I can just add to that, the Living with Fire presentation, and many of you probably received, if you're in the Wildland Urban Interface, the beautiful printed material. But they're also doing a home hardening workshop the evening of November 19th. So a shift, we spend a lot of time focusing on vegetation, and vegetation's important, but home hardening is really important. And some of that's simple stuff like putting covers over your gutter or mesh over vents so embers can't get in. So the evening of November 19th, I believe it's at the Embassy Suites in San Rafael, but all that information is on the Fire Safe Marin website. And if any of you are contractors, earlier that day, they're actually doing one specifically designed for contractors, which will create a really good informed group of contractors in the county. So we're really excited about our partnership with Fire Safe Marin, so thank you for that.
What are the pros and cons of putting electric utility lines underground?
You got that one?
Sure. Can you pull it out of there?
Maybe.
So I'm not the power company. Obviously, they have some issues with their infrastructure. I don't believe, I mean, we have like over 110 miles of power lines in Marin, and so I would just guess as a cost thing, that'd be pretty crazy amount of money to put them underground, and so I think there's certainly challenges, certainly new development. I believe that should be what's happening, but we don't regulate them. But certainly we know that there are fires caused by power lines, and so anything they can do to harden their infrastructure is important.
What is the relationship of the JPA to Fire Safe, Firewise, Ready Marin, all these other organizations, so we don't have a confused public wondering who's doing what to whom?
So Fire Safe Marin is a nonprofit, and certainly we would want to work with Fire Safe Marin to provide a lot of the central point for public education, the same with Ready Marin and a variety. The Firewise program is basically a national program, so we don't really control that. It's run by the National Fire Protection Association, and it's really a framework for neighborhoods to work together to improve their fire preparedness. And so certainly understand, there's lots of fire terms, lots of fire committees and such, that making sure that folks understand what the Joint Powers of Authority is, or the Wildfire Prevention Authority is compared to those other groups is important.
And I think I would add the defensible space and the inspections would only support things like Firewise. Firewise is a program, if anyone's not familiar with it, where the idea is your whole neighborhood gets a distinction as a Firewise community because you've come together and you've put in a certain level of effort to reduce your fire risk. And so being able to use the resources that the JPA potentially would put forward would just increase our Firewise communities and support some of those other initiatives. I think they're very complementary. It's a great question.
Hi, great presentation, and I agree that a lot of this needs to be done, but creating a new bureaucracy to oversee what really needs to be done locally seems complicated to me. And I reflect back on one of the grand jury reports from a decade ago. They talked about the high cost of governance in Marin County, where we have all these JPAs and various fire districts and such. You point out that having all of these fire districts really makes it difficult for them to work together. I think Jason Weber has stated that we now have 19 fire districts or fire prevention services. We used to have 36. I think we should put effort into further consolidating, the fire services, rather than creating a JPA to oversee a countywide project where locally the fire department should be going door to door for recommendations. They should be planning evacuation routes with the police department as well as alerts. So that's my thought and concerns about creating the JPA as a way to get this to happen.
Any reaction to that?
I'm just going to say one thing that Christi can back me up on is I have heard Jason Weber say, and I have heard San Rafael's Fire Chief, Chief Gray say, that the JPA may be, probably will be, a way to begin to bridge all these fire districts and perhaps someday have a total Marin County Fire District. If they work together, they will slowly come together.
Yeah, and to echo some of that, we have some successful, well, we have several successful JPAs that the fire chiefs work on. The hazmat JPA, no unfunded liabilities, works excellent. Nobody even knows about it because it works so well. Same with our paramedic authority, similar case, no unfunded liabilities, and the groups work together. In fact, the model for the zones, the operational zones, is what we adopted for this JPA. There are 19 jurisdictions that have fire responsibility and taxing authority. There really are only 13, quote, fire chiefs, fire districts in the county, and some of those have already consolidated. We certainly think that this is one step in which that could help promote or at least start that process of maybe additional or future consolidations. So I understand your concerns, certainly. I believe the elected board will work hard to ensure that certainly there are no unfunded liabilities and that it's not a bloated organization, and that no pensions will be employed under the JPA, 10% caps on overhead. So there are a variety of things being put into place to minimize that concern.
I think if I can comment on your other point about the county-wide for what you believe should be local initiatives. One, I think, just speaking for San Rafael, just as an example, we have Santa Venetia and San Rafael. And Santa Venetia is county responsibility, but we do first response there. And so when we go into Santa Venetia, we have done nothing from a prevention standpoint, but are responsible for providing response. And so that's just one micro example. If anyone lives out on the San Pedro Peninsula, where it's literally, it feels like sometimes almost every other house, you switch between city and county and China Camp and everything else. And so by creating, and we see that with all of kind of just Marin. As someone that is pretty new to Marin, it is a really confusing county for jurisdiction lines. And so I think because of that, this overall authority becomes so much more essential, because it doesn't matter if one small district or entity is doing something right because of the way everything connects. And the other important piece is the way we're seeing some of these fires spread are ember storms that are blowing literally a mile or two in advance of that fire. And if you think about a mile or two going east to west in Marin County, you are crossing multiple jurisdictions very quickly. And so to have everybody on the same page, meeting the same standard, is really essential, not just to responder safety, but to your safety as well.
Yes, I'd like to thank the three of you. I thought the presentations were outstanding, and I think if the electorate can get the information that you have, I think this will pass overwhelmingly. As someone that hasn't voted for all of the parcel taxes, I can tell you I'm 1,000% behind this one. One thing I did want to mention is I think this is a good start. I think it would be unfortunate if the people voted for this and then said, well, okay, this JPA is going to take care of everything. I think each individual citizen has to get involved. And there are a couple of ways. I didn't hear this mentioned, but I would like to hear you comment on the NRGs and the neighborhood response groups. We have them in my neighborhood. I've joined, my wife and I have. And there's also CERT training, which is Community Emergency Response Team. That's available, the training is available through the fire agencies, and my wife and I have also taken that. And it's not only fire danger, but earthquake and other storms, things that can happen. But I think it's very important for the citizenry to remember that each person has to take care of themselves and their neighbors, and don't, we'll pass this, but don't just think, okay, well now the fire agencies are going to take care of everything and we're all set, I'm going to pay my parcel tax. We have to go further, and everybody has to get involved, and perhaps you might want to comment on those two organizations.
Yeah, wonderful points. I honestly don't have a lot more to add other than that. The neighborhood response groups are a concept that we're definitely growing across Marin. Recently, with the support of the Board of Supervisors, a full-time coordinator was hired to help support CERT across the county, as well as the Get Ready program, which is all focused on that individual preparedness and what we can do to educate. And again, certainly, when you're preparing for wildfire, I'm an all-hazard person. And so when you're preparing for one thing, I don't care why you bought water. If you bought it for the fire and you use it for the earthquake, at least you had it. But the neighborhood response group is essential, and it is the idea of creating structures so you can have leadership. What we've seen time and time again with large fires, as well as any other disaster I've worked, is responders are initially overwhelmed, and it's how neighbors can help themselves and take care of each other that matters. So yeah, the neighborhood response groups and the CERT program is excellent. You can get more information on all of that at readymarin.org. And we do 10 to 15 classes for new CERT members across the county every year. This year, the last class is full, but we'll start them up again early next year and encourage everybody to attend. Thank you for that.
Yeah, excellent points, and agree with all of those. And certainly the public, this is a partnership, and so we all have to take care of our homes and properties. The fire department can't do it all by themselves, so excellent point. And part of that message, we're trying to work through the public education aspect of it, and to help residents understand that they have control over a lot of things, and that they can do some things right now to harden their homes, to make them less flammable, dealing with their vegetation. So there's lots of things that residents need to engage in, and certainly part of that education, the Living with Fire sessions, the Fire Safe Marin website, and all that information is there to really start engaging the public to take care of their own property and their homes. And so thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm generally not one who is for yet another layer of an organization to tell me what I cannot do and what I have to do, or else I get a fine or something. But this is really a case where it's our living area that we protect. It's everybody's living area. Everybody is benefiting from this. The point that I want to make is, yeah, it benefits everybody, but not everybody pays for it. Only landowners and homeowners pay for it. The others go scot-free. It's like saying, okay, we had a good lunch. This half of the room pays for it, and the rest get a free lunch. That's what I'm objecting to. I think everybody should be paying towards it, not just homeowners and landowners. Thank you.
Any comment?
So I think the only thing I would say, and it's kind of what you saw in the presentation, is that the multi-units do have a flat rate associated with them, which is the rental. And so some of that is, when you're saying only landowners, anyone that's not owning is presumably a renter that lives in the county. And so to my understanding, there are not protections within this that prevent the landlords from passing down those costs to their renters. So in that sense, regardless if you own the property and you're renting it out, that's all I could say about that, is that there is specifically a fee included for the multi-units, which would cover the renters, as well as there are flat fees for the commercial, correct?
And I know there are also fees in there for vacant land. Now, the public lands obviously are a whole different story, but vacant lots, those are included. There's a fee. I don't remember the exact amount, but the attempt has been to cover everybody that you can based on a property tax. The sales tax is a different issue, and disadvantages a different group of people. So I don't think there's a perfect way.
I'm wondering, and this may be a facetious question, how much federal land do we have in Marin, and how is it maintained for fire safety?
So the National Park Service owns the federal land in the county. I want to say 26 or 46,000 acres, something like that. So it's a big chunk of land, certainly. also with the Water District, and then Parks and Open Space. And so we have worked closely with all those land management agencies. They can be part of this. They have some funding that will come to the table so that we can do work across jurisdictional boundaries, that we're not stopping at the boundary. The Park Service has a small fire hazard reduction budget. We have Measure A from Parks and Open Space that would contribute on fire hazard reduction on their lands, as well as the Water District has, I believe, dedicated a big chunk of funds to also do fire hazard reduction. So they come to the table with us in planning projects, and so that we are treating, as much of the landscape as we can, regardless of jurisdictional responsibility, to get the biggest benefit from a fire hazard reduction standpoint to protect communities.
How much is their budget? Do you know?
The Water District, I heard from the Water District, $1 million has been set aside for fire safety at one of their board meetings. The Park Service contributes at least $250,000 right now, and then Parks and Open Space are funding a portion of one of our TAM fire crews. Annually, they contribute a good $1 million, if not more, annually. I'm not sure exactly all their funding mechanisms.
I think one thing I'd point out, so certainly Point Reyes National Seashore is the federal land, right? So a lot of West Marin and Golden Gate. Basically West Marin. But one of the important things is, and I say this in a lot of my presentations, is like the Earth has been very naturally violent since it existed, right? Whether that has been shaking or fires or volcanoes or whatever the case may be, those become disasters when they're interacting with populations. So fortunately, some of these really large land masses, we don't have to treat every acre of every land. What we need to do is figure out people and treat areas around them to keep them safe and to make sure our evacuation routes are safe. So just being aware, and that also kind of to clarify, like the goal is not to cut down all of China Camp, right? Like we like having China Camp there, but we can create some buffers, we can create fire road access, we can assure evacuation routes and things like that, so.
They are doing their part.
Yes.
That was why I asked.
And are at the table, yes.
Not being taken money from Trump.
Yeah, no.
I want to talk a little bit about defensible space. I have property with a lot of trees on it. What are the rules for cutting trees down now? And I guess in the future, somebody's going to come by and tell me what trees I have to cut down?
So defensible space really isn't necessarily about denuding the vegetation or cutting down all your trees. It's really about maintenance and good spacing, limbing, pruning, cleaning up the ground. Fire starts on the ground, and so we want to create a good break between the surface and the crowns of those trees. So
I understand all that. What are the rules now for cutting down a tree?
unless it's a heritage tree of a certain species in the county code, there aren't any necessarily.
Well, so so some of that would depend on where you're at. So like in San Rafael, juniper, and we're looking to add acacia and cypress, which would be kind of those big, tall, what we call candlesticks, basically, because when they light, they go. But for the most part, the focus on a lot of the ordinances and the vegetation management is not on mature trees, because of the reason the chief mentions in terms of fire starting on the ground. The way I kind of like to help people explain this is, if you like had it, please don't do this, but if you had a matchbook on fire, like an old, and you lit it on fire, if you would be comfortable dropping it under one of those trees, then that tree is probably fine, because if you've maintained under it, right, fire can't spread under it and then catch the tree. It's when we get the crown fires and we get the fires in the crowns that become problems. And so we want to maintain mature trees because they also help lower temperatures. They help keep humidities higher. They help with carbon sequestration. Yes, sometimes you need to remove one here or there to create good fuel breaks. But generally for large mature trees, there's not a huge push to remove those, with the exception of if they're very close to a structure and overhanging the roof or near a chimney. Or dead. Anything dead and dying, generally, yes. We're trying to get rid of that, so.
I understand all that, and I've done that. Do you have to get a permit to cut down a tree today?
I don't.
If it's a heritage tree,
Monterey pine.
nope.
Just cut it down.
All right.
Good, okay.
You might want to check with your local
Yeah.
authorities, too. All right, we're running out of time. One last question here.
Thank you very much. I'd like to congratulate Rafael for sending out to my home a vegetation management inspection. And I was very excited to find out that some of these trees were highly flammable, like you mentioned juniper. However, I received this notice in June, and ever since I've been calling the city of Rafael because they offered free chipping. So, and they're passing this around from A to C to B. No one knows who actually brought this notice to my home, and it still hasn't been done. Now we have November, and I've called the chipping company. They said without the order, the work order from the Rafael Fire Department, they will not chip it. So luckily I haven't cut everything down. I paid for some of it myself. However, I thought, darn it, my taxes are finally doing something, and they should pay for the rest of it. And since they said it was very important that these things are removed, and I agree, but why is no one, please tell me, no one responsible in the Rafael Fire Department? I have names, I have a whole list, probably a dozen people who tell me this person is responsible, this person, no one.
I'll apologize and I'll be happy to
No
talk to you
one
offline.
follows through, no one.
The only thing I can say is we had a staffing shift probably right about the time that started happening, which is actually one of the reasons, full disclosure, I was initially kind of didn't really understand the whole JPA when this conversation started. And then when our two vegetation inspectors got, quite, for lack of a better phrase, poached and went to other Marin agencies, and one of the things that people came back and said is now we don't have to compete for staff. We can create one uniform defensible space inspection group that'll have the same standards, that'll have the same training. I was like, okay, now I'm on board. So unfortunately, ma'am, you might have just kind of fallen in that gap, and I will happily talk to you after this and we can resolve that, and we'll get that figured out, because we do have a chipping program and we have filled those positions now.
We're out of time. I just want to ask one last question, which I've been curious about in response to some of what we heard today about the formation of the JPA. 19 agencies or 17 agencies. There are obviously several jurisdictions, I think San Anselmo is one of them, and several perhaps fire authority entities as well that have elected not to join the JPA and have voted to not participate. And so a multi-part question, why haven't they? Which ones are they? And what is the impact of their non-participation? Does that mean once the JPA is formed, if it is passed through the taxation ballot measure, will they be out of the loop in terms of what the JPA intends to implement?
So the two jurisdictions that chose not to join were Tiburon and Belvedere. And all the rest have joined? No, San Anselmo's in. Yeah, nope. So everyone else has agreed to join the JPA. So those residents in those particular jurisdictions will not have the opportunity to vote for or against the JPA. That will not be on their ballot. They would not be part of the funding. But I would still say that they'd probably get some benefits from countywide items like education, alert and warning system, those kinds of things. And so it is unfortunate. I can't tell you why. I know Belvedere had another large parcel tax on their ballot at the same time. They were concerned about that. And then Tiburon just no comment. Correct, they will be exempt. So unincorporated is part of Marin County, and so it'll be on your ballot to vote for.
Okay. We can stick
You
around
can
and ask
vote or
questions
not
afterward if you would like. I think our presenters will be here for a few minutes at least, perhaps, if they can. So if you have questions that we didn't get a chance to address today, feel free to stick around and ask them directly. Thank you all. Thank our presenters for a terrific presentation today. And thank all of you for coming, and we hope to see you at a future event. Have a good afternoon.